You're listening to Neuma, the Crossroad of Science and Enlightenment. This podcast is a place where science meets soul and healing meets hope, where the latest in science meets ancient wisdom to illuminate the path toward healing and transformation. We break through stigma and misinformation to explore the transformative power of psychedelic therapy, holistic health, and the mind-body connection. Through stories, insight, and expert conversations, we provide practical solutions to help you reclaim your mental health, embrace your spirituality, and achieve true enlightenment. Hosted by Alan Wiederhold, author of the book Walking in the Garden, Discovering God Through Psychedelics. Alan is the consummate explorer, passionate about empowering others to embrace the divinity of their true selves, as well as the founder of Neuma Health, whose mission is to restore and transform lives. Here's your host, Alan Wiederhold.
Hey everyone, this is Alan Wiederhold. I am the CEO and founder of Neuma Health, and I am so honored today to have Matt Zemon, who has been very instrumental in my own personal journey over the last 8 months of going down this rabbit hole of what we're going to talk about today. But Matt, Amazon bestseller, one of my favorite books of all time, Psychedelics for Everyone. So a little plug there. Entrepreneur, academic, master's in science, psychology, neuroscience from King's College. You have done an incredible amount of work. So again, thank you so much for just coming on the show and spending some time with me.
Alan, I appreciate you inviting me for this launch of this really exciting chapter in your life. And I appreciate you including me in the conversation over the last, 8 months as things have shifted. It's been a kind of a fascinating walk. I'm hoping we're going to talk about some of that.
We are. So let's get into that. So 2 years ago, I'm going down this rabbit hole of life. I am blowing my life up to, basically everything was falling apart for me. I had built a great company. I had married the college sweetheart. I had everything that you could possibly want by world standards. And yet I wasn't happy. And there was a point, and I talked very openly about this with everybody, that my wife just said, I love you, but I'm not in love with you. You don't love yourself. And we need to figure that out. So it kind of led me into these conversations of places that I didn't know I was going to go. I wasn't comfortable in going there. And that's really what I wanted to talk about today. So because you're hearing so much right now about this mental health crisis, and everyone is in very similar positions that I was. I had a lot of suicidal thoughts. I just thought it would be easier if the world was just, without having to deal with me and my issues. And then what I found is that I didn't really have that many when I thought about it. So, but it was this conversation around psychedelics. And I remember having a lot of friends that had used the word, and being a veteran, growing up in a Christian home, having these religious conversations, being in the 80s, drugs were bad, resisted the conversations. I had no idea what I was really talking about. So when someone says the word psychedelic, what immediately comes to mind for you?
Well, the first thing I want to do before I even answer that question is just validate everything you just said. I think there's a lot of us, and I'm going to focus on men for a second. There's a lot of us who get into this provider role where we're basically, I was raised, I'll speak from the I was raised to do more, provide. And that became what I think led to my workaholism. And I was a good provider. And I didn't realize that by spending so much time providing, I was not able to give the emotional support to my children or to my wife or to my friends, if I want to look outward. And as I turned that lens towards me, I wasn't able to have that for myself and for my own learning and healing and growing and connecting. And I think for me, when you talk about kind of by worldly measures being a success, yeah, sure. And for me, I just kept moving the goalpost. I'll be happy when this. Okay, now let's do this, and now let's do that. And it was a never-ending game for me.
And it ultimately takes such a toll on your family because you keep moving the goal. And I remember my wife and my kids actually saying the same thing. It was just so easy just to buy them off and to be able to just, not really have to hear the problem, but just make it go away. And my wife and my kids have actually said, you never gave us your heart. You didn't give us your time. You gave stuff that we really didn't care about. We wanted you. So when you say provider role, it really is. It's an interesting thought, because I actually wrote an article this morning about CEOs who lead former companies that they start after these experiences because they start to learn more about the be, have, do rather than the have, do, be. So because I feel like we're so focused here on having and doing and less about who we actually become.
Yeah, that resonates, Alan. Of course it does. So then, to bring us back to your question, you asked, what do I think of when I think of psychedelics? And I'm going to use two words. I'm going to use psychedelics as in mind manifesting. And I'm also going to use the word entheogen, because I think it's important that we have both in this discussion. So we can use psychedelics for mind manifesting and entheogens for bringing forth spirit, for the use of those medicines in spiritual situations, which is how they have historically been used. And I believe in this conversation, there's a role for both. There are going to be people who say, I want a medical model. I want somebody with a lab coat to give me a prescription and a diagnosis and then give me some medicine. Great. And there's going to be other people who are going to say, I don't want to have to prove I have enough depression or anxiety or an eating disorder or a substance use challenge or OCD to be allowed to explore my consciousness. I want to use these tools to connect with source, whatever that means to them. I want to use these tools to be a part of my community and the interconnectedness of all things. And I want to use these tools in a more ceremonial setting, as they have been for thousands and thousands of years. So I think both are important. And I think by using a different language, psychedelics, when we talk about medical, entheogens, when we talk about spiritual, it helps us kind of set a boundary around what are we talking about.
So let's take that word, because psychedelic is a relatively new term, isn't it? I mean, it's something that's really more of a Western culture kind of a created term. Where did that originate?
It was back in the 60s with Huxley and Osmond. They were trying to find what do we call this new, they were trying to wrap their heads around these terms and, find language for them. And there isn't anything else that behaves or makes us feel the way these medicines make us feel. So they felt like we need to call it something, and let's go with psychedelics. And then a little later, as more and more spiritual experiences were occasioned during those psychedelic experiences, some other scholars got together and said, we need a different word for this. And we need one that ties into the lineage that we all carry forward. And let me just stop on that for a second, Alan. It is so easy for us to say, especially in North America, okay, we have peyote that was here with some of our Native American tribes. We can go down a little bit further south into Mexico, into Central America, into South America, and talk about the use of sacred mushrooms. But mushrooms are on every continent except for Antarctica. They were used by many, many different communities. In addition to mushrooms, we have things like iboga, used primarily in Africa and then moved out. We had soma. Psychedelic after psychedelic after psychedelic. So I bring that up to give kind of permission or to invite the thought that we all have a psychedelic lineage. Just the church and the state has worked really hard to suppress it over the last 50 years of prohibition, over the last 400 years of colonization, over the last couple thousand years of history. And we as modern tribes people need to figure out, or have the opportunity to figure out, what is going to be our relationship with these substances, and are we going to invite them into our lives?
It's an interesting thought, because I always find ironic in Western cultures, we never really think beyond 100 years. So when you say that we have this lineage and we go back far enough, and it was interesting because I was reading a couple of the books that, well, not only yours, but some of the other things that have some historical. Soma is actually a really good book. But when you go back and you do a lot of the research, you do find that these things have been around for thousands of years. And then you start to ask the question, at what point, why? Like, why are we whitewashing some of this history? And you kind of raised another interesting point, because immediately you think psychedelics, you think 60s, you think hippies, you think of all of that time, but you don't really ever think even further beyond that.
Totally agree with you. It's
so whitewashing. Yeah. I mean, was it the church? Again, we all have a point of view. Is it as society was moving forward more into a industrialized society that it became less about ceremonial, more about do, more of the industry, just kind of doing the 9 to 5 thing?
Yeah, I think it's easy to try to pin this on post-industrial revolution thought, but the reality is, I mean, it has been a guarded tool. So if we look even at the Eleusinian mysteries back in Greece, taking place over a couple of thousand years, it was punishable by death to reveal the secrets of what they were consuming.
And Socrates died for that.
That is yes. So, and then I'm going to try to say this gently. When we talk about organized or institutionalized religion, there have been a little bit of separation between maybe the teachings of the faith leaders and what the church actually did. And as we look at how the colonial church, the imperial church, moved across the world, they were not a fan of direct spiritual experiences. And they really crushed it. And then we know there's a relationship between church and state, even if we talk about separation. And yeah, so we had some challenges there. And then we get into the whole Controlled Substances Act of 1970. So we can fast forward all the way here to the last little bit of time. And the Nixon administration knew that these drugs were not what they said they were. They knew they had a medical purpose. They knew they had a ceremonial purpose. They knew in many cases that these were non-toxic and non-addictive drugs. And yet, for their purposes, they schedule them as they schedule them. And they have they did it. I mean, if you're setting out to imprison Black and brown people, they did a great job. And it is awful, and it is time for it to get fixed. But yeah, lots and lots of reasons why we have whitewashed over this.
So there were tons of medical research like done right here in Baltimore where I live, and basically scrapped, because I remember when you and I did a presentation earlier in the year and sitting down and talking to some of those early founders and talking about all the research that they had in filing cabinets and how they had this cease and desist, and it all had to kind of go away overnight. I mean, we've lost decades of research that could have been really there to benefit. So I don't think we think about the politics and the role of church and state and how those have, somewhat of an impact on that. And really, if you kind of carry that over, the Reagan administration, I mean, would they just say no to drugs? Did that have anything probably advance the cause a little bit further?
It did. Incarceration rates continue to go up. They also did some things in that administration where they penalized drugs that were used by, again, Black and more by minority communities than white communities differently. And again, it led to a disproportionate amount of our Black and brown brothers and sisters getting arrested. And not ideal. But let's take this back then to us. Let's take it back to people who are listening who were born in the last, 52 years, 54 years. Our entire lives, we grew up in a prohibition, but no one told us this is a prohibition. We had heard about the alcohol prohibition from way back when, in the olden days. But no one said, oh, and by the way, we are in a prohibition right this second. For me, I'll speak from the I grew up with just say no. I believed it. I believed that all drugs are bad. They're going to fry my brain. They're going to lead me to addiction. There's no room in my life for them. I don't even have to look at them. The idea of the decriminalization movements and those things were, it's like, no, we don't need them. They're bad. I didn't even look at it. So I completely understand when I'm talking to people today about psychedelics or about entheogens, that they're like, what are you talking about? Aren't those dangerous? Aren't those... And there's so much unpacking that has to take place. I have to check my bias all the time around the use of drugs and remind myself, okay, wait a minute. There are a whole bunch of drugs that I consume that I don't even think twice about. Why am I feeling biased towards these? It's a learning curve. And I think for most people, this is a learning curve, and that's okay. Because there's 200 some academic institutions studying these things. We're having beautiful science coming up that is reinforcing what the indigenous cultures and wisdom keepers have been saying for a long time. And that's changing the way society looks at this. And I'll say one more thing and I'll stop. We have hit a point in our culture where depression and anxiety is on the rise, where our Surgeon General is saying we have a loneliness epidemic, where people are leaving churches and the communities that have held them together historically in large numbers. We're working at home instead of offices. We know that the pharmacological solutions that are available to us come with really tremendous side effects. And we know they don't get to the root issue. They just numb symptoms. So all of this is happening. And we are remembering that we have these tools that may be available to us. And I think those things converging are leading to this psychedelic renaissance, this entheogenic reformation, all of these things happening now for people like you, for me, and for other people who are, if you're still listening to this podcast, you are either involved in this or you're really close to being.
I actually was talking to somebody, they called this the fifth Reformation.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was really beautiful. And as you were talking, I was kind of laughing because that's how this whole thing happened. Rachel and I were in Arizona with our concierge doctor. And these conversations are taking place in a circle of mastermind businessmen that I work with. And I'm all friends are having these amazing healing. And I'm sitting on a deck in California and I'm saying, no, these are drugs. This is wrong. And then my doctor actually said to me the exact same thing, Matt. He's like, bro, I give you stuff from a lab every month. I have no idea where it comes from. And this is something that came from the ground that they've been used for thousands of years. And I think you need to and he said it just like that, I think you need to recheck your bias. And then I went home and I didn't have a frame for that. I'm like, well, maybe he's right. And then as I started to do my own investigations and I started to figure out that he was right, it's insane how we are okay taking a Tylenol, or we're okay having a beer, or we're okay with all of these coffee. But the moment we talk about these things, it's almost like flags go up and everyone thinks you're kind of a little bit weird or a little bit off. So it is incredibly cool to be able to see people having these healings. And as a veteran, and I've been really involved on Capitol Hill over the last couple of months as we've been trying to get legislation passed and hearing other stories. It's so amazing to be able to be part of this. And a lot of the people that I've worked with, they have said to me as kind of a last straw, my doctor gave me some SSRIs and some coping skills, and my coping skills aren't working. And now I have insomnia, and they gave me a pill for that. And now I have this pill for insomnia, and I have this pill for anxiety, but now I need another pill for this. So it's so sad. But then when you see the transformation that happens on the other side of that, people who are listening that are questioning, it's real. I mean, the numbers don't lie. You were alluding to the 200 reports. I think I saw 230 different clinical trials or different phases of things being assessed right now. And you're right. The church, I heard a number, 64% is the average population of a church right now. And 4% of that identify as practicing. So 64, 10, 4% practice. So there's a big disconnect there. So, right now people are leaving because we're not connecting that. Like we're connecting to something with anxiety. We're going to get fed on a Sunday, and then we leave and we go back to our normal lives. The spirituality side is somewhat lost in our daily lives.
Absolutely. So two things are coming up for me. So for those listening to this podcast who have not really studied the risks and the safety of these medicines. I just want to pause for a moment.
I was actually going to ask this. So we've talked about how great. What's the other side?
Yeah, these are not for everyone. There are people who have certain pre-existing conditions or are taking certain prescriptions or supplements where there are real risks. And then there are risks associated. So I don't use the word these are safe. What I use is these are relatively risk reduced compared to other medicines in this family. When we pay attention to source, set, and setting, we can reduce that risk even more. For those that are curious, there's a beautiful study by Dr. David Nutt from Imperial College of London where he takes a bunch of drugs that are, some are legal, some are illegal, and says, here is the harm to self and harm to others. And the most dangerous drug for self and others is alcohol. It's like a 72, I believe, on his chart, and mushrooms are like a 6 or a 7. So, and everything in between. And then there's another, which might be Imperial College as well, that did addiction and harm. And you can see how addiction, how low mushrooms are in the addiction scale compared to caffeine and compared to alcohol and compared to tobacco. So, those charts are out there. For those who are saying, okay, I don't know, I am on some prescriptions. What am I okay to do? I would recommend you talk to your medical provider. I'm not a medical provider, nor is Alan. If you don't have one that you're comfortable talking, go to spiritpharmacist.com and talk to Ben Malcolm. He'll do an intake. He'll look at your unique medical background, and then he'll give you an assessment and a consultation on what might be right. And in many cases, it's not a black and white thing. I can't do any psychedelics, or it's more of, okay, I'm on, I'll give an example. I'm on an antidepressant and I would like to experience what we're talking about. Great. Maybe ketamine or psilocybin is right for you. But MDMA and ayahuasca might be very, very dangerous. So it's getting that type of nuanced information so that you can make the most informed decision about how to keep yourself safe with these substances. If you were to say, I'm schizophrenic, Ben and any other medical professionals will say, none of these are going to work for you. If you're bipolar in active mania, they're going to say the same thing. And some doctors will say bipolar period excludes you, and others will say, as long as you're not actively manic. So get your own medical advice to decide what level of risk you're willing to take. And then source, where did your medicine come from? Set is your mindset. Do you know, are you doing this with a clear purpose? Do you understand the rules? Do you understand how it might feel in your body? Have you really thought through why you're doing these medicines? And then setting is the physical environment. Are you going to be interrupted by neighbors, by dogs, by Amazon? You're in an incredibly vulnerable position. So is anybody going to take advantage of that vulnerable position? Do you have control over the music? Do you have a guide there if something goes not the way you would like? All those things. But if you pay attention to, again, source, set, and setting, the probability of having a truly bad trip is very low.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Neuma, the Crossroad of Science and Enlightenment. We hope you're enjoying the deep dive into psychedelics, neuroplasticity, and the path to transformation. Before we continue, let's discuss recovery. After powerful experiences, your mind deserves more than just rest. It needs real support. That's where Neuma Hydrate comes in. Formulated with GABA, taurine, inositol, magnesium, and more, Neuma Hydrate is designed to help your brain recover faster and support neuroplasticity, giving you the clarity and the energy to fully embrace your journey. Fuel your recovery and elevate your mind with Neuma Hydrate. Check out neuma.health to learn more. Now, enjoy the rest of the episode.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the experience itself. So you just, you said the word trip or bad trip. And I think for a lot of listeners that are questioning this, I think oftentimes I get, what is it? How does it feel? Like, what can I expect from this experience? And then, is there a bad trip? So talk to me about that. Like, what is a typical, Are they different? Are each psychedelic, for lack of a better word, are they different experiences, or some longer, some shorter? We don't have to get into all of that, but what can I expect? I mean, I'm in a vulnerable position, and there's some things that were said, so just kind of curious, like, what could I expect?
Okay, so let's do a super high level, super fast walkthrough. And there's, again, you can go deep on any of these, but ketamine, legal in all 50 states, used off label for various mental health challenges. It's a 45-minute to a 1-hour journey total. If we compare that to psilocybin, which is legal in Mexico for ceremonial use, as an example, it's legal in Jamaica. You're talking about 4 to 6 hours. It's a much longer experience. Many would say it's a deeper experience. Research says it lasts longer than ketamine in terms of how long people say, I still feel the effects, I still remember that experience. Iboga or ibogaine could be 12 hours, could be 15 hours, much, much, much longer, much more physical. Ayahuasca, which we're hearing a lot about with veterans. I was just down actually with a group of veterans in Peru for a week of multiple nights of ayahuasca, and you're talking about, again, 4 to 6 hours and physically draining. You're purging each night in many cases. It's a harder medicine. So there are different experiences on these things. But what happens? What's happening in the brain and again, high-level brushstrokes, not all are the same, but your default mode network, this part of this inner narrator, gets quieted down. So for many of us, that voice is constantly telling us you need to do more, you're not worthy, you're not enough. When that goes away, it feels like the weight of the world is lifted off of our shoulders. It's such an incredible feeling. Then connections start, neural pathways start connecting that might not have connected since you were a kid. We literally, as we get older, we get into repetitive thinking patterns, and literally we prune back to where we're thinking literally the same way.
It's almost as if I always equate to like a ski slope.
Yes.
You go down the same slope every day, and your brain, whether you realize it or not, you have 72,000 thoughts a day. And 96% of those, I think was the number I heard, are automatically going to happen without you even thinking. Like they're going to happen because it's repetitive.
Yes. And then the psychedelic is like putting a fresh coat of powder, and all of a sudden we remember, I don't have to think about this like that. I don't have to think about my relationship like this. I can think about it another way. I don't have to think about my job, whatever. So that's really powerful. And then the third thing is our brain enters a state of neuroplasticity that lasts for about 30 days following the psychedelic. And that's very much like when we were a kid and we're able to learn faster. We're able to learn faster. We're able to shape and train our minds towards behavioral change, which can be super effective for those of us who are trying to, well, whether we're trying to optimize our life or we're trying to break patterns that have not been serving us. That period is super effective. And then finally, for many people, there is a feeling of something more. Some people say it's a spiritual or a source connection. Others talk about the interconnectedness of all things. Others say they feel like we are all part of the same cosmic universe. We can use all sorts of different languages, from really woo-woo to just a little bit woo-woo, but we can use that.
I love the woo-woo. I know for me personally, I came back, I wrote a book called Walking in the Garden, Discovering God Through Psychedelics. So people think I'm off my rocker.
Exactly. It is it's powerful and again, there are these medicines that we were just talking about that take hours. And then I can also bring up one called Bufo or 5-MeO-DMT. That's like a 10 to 20 minute experience, but it is called the God molecule because for many people who experience it, it's like a personal conversation or experience of being in on another plane. So it's a very different type of psychedelic than the others. So again, for your listeners, if you're still listening, I'm trying to give you enough to say there's all sorts of things that happen in the brain that enable us to remember who we are, is how I'll put it. So then if we quiet down that default mode network, we have the neurons firing, the brain's plastic, what happens? We remember that we are loved, that we are worthy, that we are enough. and that we don't have to do anything to have those things. And that, for me, was a game changer.
Same.
I didn't have to produce to please my parents. I didn't have to produce because I was told I had to produce. I got to just be.
I remember being in the top bunk. I remember my dad coming into my room crying. It was a really bad fight. My mom and dad had been married for 56 years. So it wasn't like, divorce kind of conversations, but they were young in their marriage and we were really young kids. And my dad came in and I'll never forget it. And I actually confronted him in my experience. And I said, why did you do this to me? Why did you put this on me? I was 4, but it shaped every thought that I ever had about money and success. Didn't even realize that. So that one conversation is what triggered all of these other things throughout my life that kept moving the goal. And when I was able to have that conversation with myself and forgive him and myself, I was able to come home and truly just love my wife and my family. But I also have different respect for my dad.
That's a beautiful story, and thank you for sharing. You're reminding me about, I'm thinking about MDMA specifically. So again, this is the medicine that has gotten a lot of attention. The FDA has just recently rejected a petition to re-legalize it and have asked for another study. So they've kicked the can down the road. It should happen. It's going to be a little bit longer. But on this medicine, it removes shame, blame, and guilt. So for those, and again, I think about veterans, first responders, victims of sexual assault, for those, it is a powerful tool to be able to reassess what was our role in this situation. I could have behaved better or differently if I was acting with more awareness, or so on and so forth. That is my dog saying hello. He's agreeing with this conversation. I apologize. I can see that. But it has a different purpose. It's a different medicine. It has a different mechanism of action. And it's really powerful to take away that shame, blame, and guilt as we look back at things that happened when we were 4 or 15 or 30.
Yeah. It was such an interesting, because I got to replay all of that programming from 4 all the way through even now. And yeah, so I think one of the last things that I saw, I was laying on the bed. My wife was actually covering me with her hands and her feet. And there was all this darkness that had been hitting me since I was little, because I'm a trauma survivor as well. And
was she really doing that, or was this in your mind?
This was in my journey. So I saw her soul actually covering me for 23 years. She took all my darkness, she absorbed all of it. And when we came back together, I had asked her if I could take care of her now, because she had really carried me for so much of that, and without me even realizing all of the moving of the goalposts. She took all that for me. So it was amazing.
It's amazing you could see that it was that big of a transformational observation.
And I record all of mine.
Mm-hmm.
I actually, with music, I mask, and then I actually record. I put a microphone and I speak everything that I hear, see, and say, and then I go back and I actually transcribe all of it, so that I kind of know, because my ego will try to tell me that it didn't happen or that it wasn't real, and I have the audio so I can hear it. So when you mentioned the word bad trip, or the phrase bad trip, what is that? And is it real?
So I separate that into a couple different things. When I say bad, let me start this. Let me start with challenging. There can be experiences on psychedelics that are incredibly challenging, where people see things that are hard to see. The advice that has been given from both the scientific community and the indigenous community when it comes to those types of experiences is to explore them with wild curiosity, is to trust and let go. If there's a dragon in front of you, to crawl in the nose and look out the eyes. And when we do that, there can be real healing, even if it looks messy, even if it looks like a lot of tears, or is just hard emotionally on the person. So challenging is not bad. Bad is, for me, is when someone is taken advantage of in a psychedelic experience. Bad is, for me, when someone gets into a loop, or has a level of fear that they're not able to look at it with curiosity, And there's no one there to help them move through that. And all of a sudden, that experience that could be beautiful becomes traumatic. And I think I'll leave it at that. But that is why I believe there should be ceremonial use, why there should be multiple ceremonial leaders in the space, why we have sitters in the space. So lots of eyes to make sure people are protected, lots of eyes who can help people if they need it. People who've worked with facilitators who've worked with many, many people who, if someone does get in a loop, knows how to use smell or fan or certain touch with permission to help move that person into another scene and for them to be able to continue processing. I'm not a fan of people who do one-on-one work. I think that's dangerous. It's not my place to judge. It's just, it is a level of risk I'm not willing to take from me. So I think if you want to have a, quote, private session, it should be at least 2-on-1. I'm a huge fan of the community settings. And that can look like in the legal space, it can look like legal group ketamine. And in the ceremonial space, it can look like ceremonial healing. And that can, again, there's lots of jurisdictions where it's legal ceremonially, and we know there's many, many entheogenic churches that practice protected by statute and law, but are technically not legal. And that's a rabbit hole to go down in another day, probably.
Absolutely. So what would you say to somebody who is, well, someone like us that was before the transformations? We're stuck in our own loop of anxiety and depression and moving the goalpost or whatever, and they're searching for something. What advice would you give? Good, bad, or indifferent? I think we've heard quite a few really amazing things, which I knew we would, to really start to search out ceremonial or clinical, as we called it, but ask the right questions. So what are the right questions?
So I love this because it's super tricky. It's hard. So I'll do this. There's a yoga sutra where there's a monkey and a bird sitting on a branch, and it's raining its ass off. And the bird is protected by its nest. It has a little 2-story nest. The water's not getting on it. The monkey's getting soaked. And the bird looks at the monkey. The bird watches the monkey getting soaked. And the bird, meaning to be a good bird, a friendly bird, a loving bird, says, "Hey, monkey, why don't you just build a nest like mine? If you had a little nest on top of you and below you, you wouldn't get wet. You'd stay dry." And the monkey looks at the bird and picks it up and throws it out of the tree and destroys the bird's nest because the monkey didn't ask for help. The monkey was just sitting there, and the bird was giving unsolicited advice. So I know I have to be careful in giving people unsolicited advice. But for those who came to me and say, "Hey, I'm looking for something. There's got to be something else." I'm happy to say, yeah, there is something else. And maybe it's right for you and maybe it's not, but let's talk about it. But what we've been told that the only solutions are from the pharmaceutical companies is not true. What we've been told is these natural occurring in medicines are dangerous has been exaggerated. And there are ways to do this legally for those who choose to, and there are ways to do it in an underground environment for those who choose to, and there's a ways to do it with a tourism environment for those who choose to. But there are other options, and the science is promising. If they want data, there's plenty of data, and the risks are real. So and look at it all and make an informed decision on whether it's for you, for someone you love, or maybe just to change the way you vote in the next election. That these medicines exist and they've worked for thousands of years, and there's an alternative, and you don't have to take them every day, and they have very few side effects.
So they aren't for everyone, yet they're worth asking the right questions.
Yeah, well, I mean, I actually read my book, Psychedelics for Everyone. I didn't mean everyone should take one. I meant they're good for society. And so, yeah, asking the right questions, becoming informed. And let me just hammer this point for a moment. Even in the medical community, there's an ideological divide. I'm going to use ketamine as an example. There are ketamine doctors who believe that it's just a biochemical reaction, that you can come into their ketamine clinic, they're going to stick an IV in your arm, You're going to get the medicine. It's going to work in your glutamate system, and they're going to send you on your way. And there are other ketamine doctors who believe it's a biochemical, psychosocial, spiritual process. And they're going to sit down with you in advance and talk about your intentions. And then they're going to give you a blanket and music and an eye mask and some type of ceremony around the ketamine. And then afterwards, they're going to help you unpack the awakenings and the awarenesses that you had and help you integrate that into your life. And they're going to stress the importance of a contemplative practice or some type of integration process. Both are legal. Both are close enough in terms of cost. And they're wildly different philosophies. So it's up to us as consumers to say, what do we want? How do we want it? And then to go find that. But it's all available. And it might be, and the last thing I'll say in this is, maybe for cost purposes, that first ketamine doctor is what you want to use. Maybe for whatever reason, you can find a way to get that super inexpensively, and that's what you're going to use. Great. And maybe you still want some of these other things. So you have to supplement around that. And okay, I'm going to use this coach or this therapist who's going to help me before and after. I'm going to go to the doctor for this piece. And I'm going to bring my own playlist and my own blanket and my own eye mask. Great. So that's the ketamine hack.
The ketamine hack. So yeah, it is interesting because I'm seeing a lot of, just as you're describing, a lot of maybe anesthesiologists who are tired of being in the ER and they want to make a difference. So they've opened up these clinics to do IVs. They're working with other coaches on the side, bringing in facilitators and things like that. So ask the right questions. So Matt, thank you. I knew that this conversation was going to be informative, eye-opening, knowledgeable, because you have so much incredible knowledge. And I know that when we met, I had a lot of questions and you were able to really kind of answer those. And when we were speaking, it was kind of an amusing conversation because when you and I presented together, I thought it was going to be one way, really around veterans and PTSD, and it actually became community leaders really looking for a solution for a trauma-identified city like Baltimore. And the conversation was so magical and beautiful. And it was a conversation that I think I was somewhat caught off because there is this unfortunate bias that, I kind of equated to, we think of woo-woo is the word that you used. And when we think these things, I remember people coming out of there saying, wait a minute, these were like business people and community leaders that were having these conversations. It wasn't a bunch of hippies. So I think I'll leave it with, I think that we need education, and I think we need to leave bias at the door. And I think we need to continue to ask the right questions and to see what the best option is for you, the listener, to be able to go down your own road of healing.
I love that, Alan. I appreciate the thoughtfulness that you're bringing to this. I appreciate that you're trying to get the best information for yourself and for your family, and you're trying to share as you go what you're learning and help other people. You're inviting other people into your practice. And I think there's a distinction there, Alan, because there's a lot in our Western world of I know better than you of what you should do. I know, but I am the teacher. And in this, it's much more of a peer relationship. We can bring in people to hold the space. We can bring in medicine that helps occasion these types of emotions, but it's up to each person to walk through that door and to do their own work. And that is empowering.
Beautifully said, because the medicine is only a tool.
Medicine's a tool. It is not a cure for anything. It's a catalyst.
We have to do the work.
Absolutely. And we have it, and we have the ability to do it.
This is Alan Wiederhold, the host of Neuma, the Crossroad of Science and Enlightenment. And again, Matt Zemon, thank you for your time today, and thank you for such an incredible conversation.
Alan, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it very much.
If you like this episode, subscribe to our channel. I will have links there on how to contact Matt, how to get access to Matt's books. I'm telling you, listeners, Psychedelics for Everyone is a really great read and one that you absolutely have to have on your desk. So, Matt, again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Alan.